Hello, everyone, and welcome to my podcast. It's Julianne Williams. It's Brave Enough, Renew, Recreate, Recover You. I have a really special guest today. She happens to be a friend of mine and my neighbor, and we go back a lot of years. I was listening to her on Facebook the other night and realized that she had a really big message to share with the folks who listen to this podcast about grief. So I'd like to introduce you to Jill O'Bannon. She is the mother of 6 children, but is also a businesswoman, an entrepreneur, and is doing a lot of exciting things in her life. And I'm just really proud to be her friend. What we're going to talk about today is something that she and her family have struggled with, and it's sort of a twofold issue. One is going to talk about the drug addiction and the drug problem that we have, the crisis in our country, and then the other thing about a little bit about the grief of being a parent, walking your child through and your other children through drug addiction in your family. So with that, I am going to again introduce Jill to you and ask her to tell us a little bit about herself and what she would like to share with us on, just the last few years that they have walked their child through a very serious drug addiction.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited also to share my story because I think it's so important, and I don't think people are honest about it all the time. I think it's sometimes something you can be ashamed of as a mom and even as a family, to be dealing with someone in your family that has addiction. And like you said, I have 6 kids. I own some retail stores in our hometown, and my husband and I are always looking for the next fun adventure to be on. And that's kind of me, a little synopsis of me. But 6 years ago, we put our second son in rehab for the first time. And he spent his 16th birthday in rehab. And over the last 6 years, we've gone to hell and back. And what started with alcohol and cocaine, it actually started with Adderall that he would take to get his AP homework done. Ended up going to cocaine because cocaine was cheaper. And so he didn't have to hide that money. He would use his lunch money to buy cocaine. And now he is sitting in a jail cell and is a habitual fentanyl addict, meth, heroin, crack, alcohol, pot, you name it, he does it. So it's a story, I think, that's so important because we are just a normal family. We're just a normal family. Like Julianne said, we live on her street. We aren't the stereotypical family where this should, quote unquote, be happening. And my son went from a 4.0 student who played sports, had his eyes set on USC to be an engineer, to living on the streets and being homeless in cities like Dallas and Phoenix and LA. So it's quite a story to tell, and the grief behind it too, right? As a mom, when you had all these expectations and dreams for your child, and to see them not happen is hard, I think. And I think that's what I was talking about the other night, right?
Yeah.
And is that kind of,
Yeah, I mean, we all have a
so
dream, right, for what we think everything is going to look like. And loss isn't just death. Grief doesn't come from just death and loss. Grief comes from losing anything that is of value to us, whether it be a person not being a thing, but, or a situation, or, whatever it is that makes you wish and want for something different.
right. And I mean, even as me as a parent, I have 6 different children and 6 different roads they're going to be on, 6 different journeys, 6 different personalities, all from the same home. And we've all had to grieve the loss of one child's life, not physically his life, but his life with us. And my girls lost their big brother who's nowhere around, which they thought he would be around. And my oldest son lost his little brother, and to this addiction. And yeah, he's not dead, right? He's alive, but he's not here. And he misses Christmases, and he misses, all kinds of things. And I can remember when he was in rehab, it was his junior year, and his little sister Molly is 2 years younger, and they had always joked that when she started high school, he would get to drive her to her first day of school. And I remember that morning waking up, and Molly came into my room, and she was just sobbing. Oh. And she said, he was supposed to drive me to school. Like, Mom, he was supposed to drive me to school. And so, right, that's grief. And she's had to process that. She's had to work through it. She's had all the things that someone who, loses someone physically kind of goes through as well, right? Like, I think grief is the same in a lot of situations. It doesn't have to necessarily be losing someone to death, but and she's gone through all the stages, resentment and anger and sadness and all of that, and she's had to work herself through it. And it's been a really hard thing to watch. At the same time, it's been a joy to watch her change, and to see her shift her view of the world, and to have grace and compassion where she probably wouldn't have it if we hadn't gone through.
Beautiful young woman.
Yeah, she is. She is. She just opened her own store, so we're, I know
I need to be in town and visit it.
I know you do need to come in, but so yeah, it's just been, I think the other day on Facebook, I was really talking about parents about, testing your kids and just being aware, and because it's I just don't want any mom to have to go through what I've gone through, because it's been hell. It's been absolute hell. And there's been several times for me that I've had to really process, would it be easier if he died? Because then that grief would start, we would process it. It would be, he's gone, and it wouldn't be this, oh, he's better, we have joy, and oh, now he's not, let's grieve it again. And so it's kind of a roller coaster. And that's a hard thing to even admit as a mom, that there's been times that I felt like that. So yeah, it's been hard.
Yeah,
it's been hard.
And I think like we talked before the podcast, and part of the thing, so we live in a small town, and it's a beautiful little town, and it's a great place to raise kids. It's a great place to live. But in our town, sometimes we don't recognize all of the things that are happening undercurrent. And I'm not criticizing at all. I live in that town. So what I'm saying is that part of what I think the awareness too, that I wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about is, how do these things happen? Because, there's a crisis, and drugs are very easily accessible to kids. I mean, we know now with the fentanyl that they're making fentanyl that looks like candy. It's a really big problem. And as parents, it's hard for us to think about our kids getting involved, especially, like you said, there's no good reason for them, but getting involved in the world of drugs. And how do we know, or how do we ever figure that out? Because I know you've done a lot of searching back and figuring things out.
Right. Because the other day too, I was saying, people came to me. People came to me and they said, something's going on with him. And I'm like, whatever, Jill, something's going on. And I would, I always would attribute it to pot. Always. Well, yeah, he's probably smoking some pot. And I'd talk to him, and he'd be like, Mom, I tried it. And, I just always took his word for it. And I never really keyed in on the fact that multiple parents were telling me there was something wrong. Multiple people were coming to me saying, hey, I saw Carson, he didn't look right, or multiple people. And what got in my way was my pride. Not my kid. And I think as parents, we have we have to listen when those people say that. And we have to admit to ourselves something is wrong, something is going on. Because even if they're not doing drugs, they're doing something to make people think they're doing drugs, right? So like there's something going on there. And you got to test your kids. You got to test your kids. I think you test your kids regardless if people are telling you stuff's going on, and to stop, just to know. And I said the other night too, or I say all the time, the minute your child puts up a fight to do that drug test, you have a problem. You have a big problem. And that's the easiest test right there. If you watch this and you have high school kids or even junior high kids and you say, you know what, I'm going to start drug testing you. If they say, okay, you're probably okay. If they say, no, why? That's stupid. You might have a problem. And so I think, there is so much undercurrent of drugs in every town.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we just are open and honest with what's going on in our own families and share each other's burdens and share each other's grief,
Mm-hmm.
I think it would really change the direction the country's going in. Because the country's going in a bad, bad direction when it comes to opiates and fentanyl. It's rampant, even in our little town. In fact, my son overdosed in our town, in my house. We found him dead, and my husband did perform CPR and brought him back, but it was on a fentanyl and meth overdose. So I just can't get it enough. And I think I was saying this earlier too to you. If I help one mom, I've done something by opening my mouth. Just one. I don't want any brothers or sisters or moms or dads or grandmas or aunts or uncles to ever have to go through what my family's gone through, because it's been hellacious, to say the least, for sure.
Well, it's taking a lot of courage for you to step out and talk about this because, like you said, we do as parents, we just don't want to acknowledge that our kids are doing anything wrong because we love them so much and we see them as so perfectly made. And I think we have such high hopes for what we think they are and what they're going to be. And it's hard to sit back and think about your child doing something that they know that you've taught them is wrong and something that would be harmful. How did you first figure out that Carson was heavily involved in drugs that was beyond marijuana?
His behavior became pretty erratic. We would catch him in a lot of lies. A lot of people had told us they had seen him at parties or going to parties. And in all honesty, what really blew us away was my daughter posted an Instagram picture that she had taken of him. And when we saw the picture, we were like, oh my gosh, he is thin. He is thin. And, they say, you don't notice, you put on a pound every couple of weeks, for 6 months, and now you're up however many pounds and you didn't realize it, right? Because it's slow and steady. Yeah. And because we lived with him, we didn't really, he was getting taller and we kind of just attributed it to that. But ultimately his behavior, his grades started to slip. His stories weren't consistent. Just a lot of things that I think we could have easily attributed to just being a high school kid, right? Just being a teenager, lying to their parents. And we did a drug test and cocaine came up on it. And I didn't know what to do as a mom, because number one, if I admitted that this was a problem, I had failed as a parent. I had failed. And number two, I didn't know if I didn't do anything, what was going to happen. Was it going to get worse? How could we control it? We couldn't control it. He was, getting drugs dropped off at the house. We would find baggies, and we started going through his room, and and we would do all these things. And it just became to the point where I literally called my insurance and I was like, I think he needs rehab. But I had nowhere to go. Like there was nobody that I could have called and said, okay, is this bad enough to go to rehab? Or is this something as a parent I need to try and handle myself?
Right.
And because of that, we put him in rehab. I, on a monthly basis, probably question that decision a lot if I put him in there too soon. Because guess what? When you put addicts in rehab, they meet other addicts who do different drugs, who teach them about different drugs.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, so he came home with a lot more information than he had prior to going to rehab. So,
well, how, I mean, that is not even something I would think about. You think I'm putting that person in a safe environment, they're going to be with professionals, you know, it's
no, they're with addicts. They're with other addicts, and addicts share their stories, and addicts talk about what they use and what kind of addict they are. Are they an alcoholic? Are they shooting up? Are they meth? Are they crack cocaine? You know, there's all these different things. And, you know, he tells me that all the time. I came home knowing more about drugs than I went there with. And those words play in my mind a lot because I check myself, and I have a little bit of guilt from that because which I know it's not my fault, but
I would say, you know, the thing, Jill, is that, I mean, I can absolutely see why you feel that way because you know, you're like, whoa, he came back knowing more. I think he would have found that out no matter
100%.
what. So, you know, so I hope that you can release some of that because I think what you did was a very good thing. I mean,
right.
Like I said, you think you have one perception and then there's this other thing. So now at least people know, like that's a great thing for people to know. Like, okay, if I'm going to choose rehab for my child, they may come out knowing more than they went in knowing. On the other hand, they probably find it out anyway. At least you took a step. You acknowledged it. You took a step and you know, did what was, especially at the time, the best thing you could do.
Right. At the time it was. And, you know, he, between the next 6 years, between the ages of 16, he turned 22 in August. He's been in upwards of 35 rehabs, between California, Texas, and Phoenix. And, he graduated from high school early because he did it online because he was in rehab. And, you know, I think that was the first, no, I'll tell you, the first loss for me as a parent and something I really had to grieve, which was really hard for me. And I still actually have not been back to the baseball field at the high school, is he loved baseball and he loves his uncle. And, you know, my brother played Major League Baseball and he always wanted to be like my brother, and he was left-handed like my brother. And so, his senior year, my brother started coaching varsity baseball for the high school. Mm-hmm. And he went to school his senior year, first day, high as a kite. He had been up for probably multiple days, on crack cocaine and Xanax and alcohol. And he walked in, he went to a senior sunrise, which I don't think he actually went to. And he went to school, came back that first day of his senior year, and we put him in rehab the next day. And so he spent most of his senior year in rehab. And that was a hard loss for me as a mom.
Yeah.
To watch his friends have their senior year baseball, and he didn't have that. And he always wanted my brother to coach him. And his addiction took that away. It took it away from him. It's a regret he has. He can't hardly talk about it. He'll start crying. And my brother still coaches, you know, baseball at the high school, and I can't go to a game. I just can't, because there's such a loss of innocence for my son, who should have been able to play baseball. Mm-hmm. But he became a drug addict. And he made the decision to try drugs and try alcohol. And I also say this all the time, something in him genetically some way he's hardwired to be an addict, and it's a disease for him. And a lot of people won't agree with me. It's a big controversy in the medical world. But I have two sons and they partied together, and one is not an addict and one is. And so there's just a lot of grief and a lot of loss there as a parent to watch your son or your daughter go through that kind of stuff, and things you thought you were going to see them do, they didn't do. He didn't walk at graduation with his friends, and he sits in a jail cell today and his friends come in with their wives and their babies. And so as a parent, it's really hard. It's really hard to watch that and see that, and to watch your other kids go through it and know how to maneuver through that loss and that grief of a normal life, whatever that is supposed to be. I don't really think there's a normal life, but we all have this misconception, right?
Well, I mean, I think, I interviewed somebody on my podcast last week, and what they said is a pleasant life.
Yes.
And I love that. It's so true. That's right. We just want a pleasant life. No chaos,
right.
No confusion, just pleasant. It's not going to be perfect, but it can be pleasant.
Well, yeah. And I mean, I just last week, I think I said to my mom and my husband, like, when's enough enough?
Mm-hmm.
When's enough enough? Like, I'm done. Like, I just want to be done with the grief, right? I want to be done processing it. I want to be done. And it's not in the cards yet, I don't think. We have something new. And his story is pretty extraordinary. I mean, and if you would have told me this was going to be our story, I would have laughed at you, because it's the stuff TV shows are made of.
Mm-hmm.
What I've seen and what I've done and what my son's been through. So
no, I mean, we were talking, I can't imagine like you said, you guys have been out looking for him on streets, not knowing, where he is. Just how helpless you must feel, because you can't change the decisions that he's making. Right. But then also to know that, I mean, you feel better that he's in jail because he's
right.
sick and can't do drugs.
Well, and it's funny you say that, because I think once my husband and I both switched the switch in our mind or whatever to the fact that we are helpless.
Mm-hmm.
I am helpless against this addiction. I cannot control it.
Mm-hmm.
I can't fix it. There's nothing I can do. And the minute we did that, the shift in us changed. The sadness didn't change. It almost increased it, right? Because there's a little bit of hope. If you think, oh, I'm going to go, there were years where we thought, okay, we're going to put him in this rehab and this is the time and this is going to work, and it didn't work. And so then we'd be down, and then we'd be, oh, we found a better rehab and we're going to put him in it. And, he was in Betty Ford. He did 90 days in Betty Ford, and actually that ended up being the worst place. It was the best place for his addiction, where he got sober. And he was he was like solid sober. I don't know if that means anything, and he ended up being body brokered out of there, which is something that a lot of people don't know about with addiction. But
I'm like, I don't even know what that is. I don't even know what body brokering is.
Right. So body brokering in the addiction world is insurance pays money. And if you have good insurance, rehabs want you. And so what a lot of these not so clean rehabs will do is they will plant people in high dollar rehabs, and they will get to know these kids, and they will convince them to leave. And so Carson made a friend that he convinced him to leave. And very long story short, he had a relapse. He ended up in this is a really good rehab, mom. Like, I've met the guy called us. I've got your son. It's going to be great. Like, I just need your insurance info. This is all my information. I'm a recovering addict, whatever. And the kid that became my son's friend at Betty Ford was probably paid $7,500 to take my son to that rehab, because our insurance at the time was one of the better rehab insurances. And so they plant these people to find these kids or people, adults that have really good insurance. And if they can get them into these different rehabs, they actually pay them cash. And so that changed his whole, that is when he actually became an opiate addict. He had not done any opiates. He had never shot up heroin. And that rehab owner actually shot him up for the first time. And it was a dirty rehab. So when we learned that we were helpless, there was some freedom in that. At the same time, there was then the grief of being helpless, right? It was like a double-edged sword.
Yeah, because at least when you're not helpless, you feel like might be able to fix it. And so now
right.
you are at the place where that, there's only so much you can or could have done. And now it's up to Carson to make the decision.
And he may never make that decision.
Well, and, I do think, that there is a gene around addiction. We've seen it in my family on my dad's side. And there have been a couple of people who have had significant alcohol problems, one that pretty much died from that, and raised the same. My dad didn't drink at all. Right. A lot of it because of what he saw, but he just said, look, I'm not going to put myself at risk. I do believe that there is that existence. And one thing that you said too that I really like on that Facebook live that you did is, we tend to judge people who become addicted to drugs or alcohol as weak or less than, or whatever you want to label it. But, the people who are addicted started the same way that most of us start. I'm going to go watch the football game with my kids tonight because it's our team's playing, and I will be having a glass or two of wine. Right. So let's talk about that for a minute, because that's a choice I'm going to make. And right. Carson made a very similar choice. He decided to try something.
Well, I mean, how many high school kids make that same choice? And, I know there's like a huge, also, debate about marijuana, and I won't go into how I feel about all that stuff. But, the minute you choose to try something, be it alcohol, a drug, anything, you have made the same choice my son made, mm-hmm. Only he couldn't stop. Mm-hmm. And I think if we could put ourselves in that headspace as a society, I think I think the thought behind addicts and how we think of them and how we view them and would change. And I think it would then change with the homeless community, because a lot of them are addicts, mm-hmm. and their addiction has stripped them of every financial means they've had. And I think there could be a shift in the thought process behind so many people, in the judgment they have with drug addicts, alcoholics, homeless, all of those things, if we all realize we made the same decision. Mm-hmm. We made the same choice. And, my son also broke his hip his sophomore year playing baseball, and, he's given painkillers. Didn't help matters. And so even there, have you ever had a surgery? Have you ever taken a Vicodin? Have you ever taken all those different pills? Sometimes it triggers something in you if you have that I don't know, that gene, I guess, or that predisposition. Like it could be not even alcohol or like right. a street drug. Absolutely. It could be any kind of anything. And you made the same choice. Mm-hmm. And I just think there would be a shift in judgment if people could grasp that and really internalize it when they see an addict, an alcoholic, and homeless person that struggles and know I'm probably one gene away from that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm one gene away.
Well, and I think even from a healthcare standpoint, you and I have talked in the past about, my husband suffering from bipolar disorder and having a really hard time getting treatment for him. Mental health and addiction are just very closely related, and we don't have a good system. And if we could change our view, what that does is, so when people care about an issue, and we'll use Alzheimer's disease as a really good example, since I worked in elderly care for so long, and it is a big issue, and it needs to be researched, and needs to be looked at. We need to have passion for people that get it.
Right.
When we do that, though, we put dollars towards it. We put our money where our mouth is, for things that we can identify with, for things that we think aren't people's fault. And but when it comes to something like mental health, because some people still think that's some choice, or drug use, again, in some ways a choice, but some ways not so much. When we recognize things in a non-judgmental way, which is what we do with cancer, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, cardiac problems, we see those as part of a human condition. If we could do the same thing, maybe we would take better steps in the United States to get treatment options out there for people, because then it's not this huge stigma.
Right. Well, I mean, even look at, just as you were talking, something clicked in my head, like even look at the fentanyl epidemic right now. It's on every news show, it's billboards, all of that. And money's being thrown at it because people are overdosing on it. But the people that are overdosing on it are not a lot of them addicts, right? So they don't have that stigma attached to them. And we're throwing money at it because it's accidental, and it's, these kids are at a party, it looks like candy, they don't know what they're taking, it was an accident, they're not an addict, and we're throwing money at it. But the minute you say this person is an addict and they're a fentanyl addict and they take it on the regular, it kind of depletes the urgency, because people see that as a choice.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, because
my son is a fentanyl addict. I mean, he is a fentanyl addict. He smokes fentanyl when he's on the street, probably every 30 minutes, to keep his high. And he's been doing that for about a year. And now the fentanyl has just become, because the border and all these things, and so people are throwing money at it. And it's just really interesting to me, as you were talking about that the stigma is just is really strong.
Yeah, it is. And it's very hard to overcome, and all of it's bad. I mean, getting at a party and not knowing what you're getting, it could happen to any innocent child, because they're children at these parties. Let's be real. They're teenagers, they're children. And they're at these parties, and they think they're doing one thing and it's something else, and that is horrible.
Yes.
But then it's also horrible that someone has a stigma attached to what their situation is, and because of that they can't get treatment, or they're looked at in a way where people don't think they deserve it, and that's a tough, and when it's your kid, that's not a good place to be.
It's not fun. And our son was afforded very good rehabs because we had an income and we had very good insurance. And now he doesn't have as good insurance, right? He's 22, he's on his own, and us trying to find him a good place to go, not even good place, a place to go, is super, super hard. And he has a family fighting for him. He has a mom and a dad and 5 siblings and grandparents and aunts and uncles and my friends and my community that lifts us up in prayer on a regular basis, that will call me and say, hey, I heard about this place, or, whatever. And what about the people who have nobody? How are they supposed to get help?
Yeah, they don't.
They can't.
They don't.
They can't.
Yeah.
They can't. And so something has to change. And I think it starts with judgment, which is an age-old problem in today's society.
Well, and I think That's why I really asked you if you would be willing to talk about this, because the more we talk about it, the more the awareness, but I like, it happens to all of us. Like, this is not some problem that happens to other people. And so we all need to be aware. And until, we keep talking about it to this, that's how we remove the stigma.
Right.
Because you have a beautiful family. You live in a beautiful home in a beautiful city, Christian. I mean, every advantage in life this
Right.
child had.
He's not the stereotype. If you were to see him on the street, first of all, he doesn't look, well, he looks like he belongs there, but he's not, he just, all the things that people can blame on addiction, all the social,
Right.
whatever it would be, he doesn't have.
Right.
And he shouldn't be as bad of an addict as he is by society's standards,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Totally.
And so it's why we talk about it, and it's why we're so open about it, because something has to change. I don't know how to change it. I'm just a mom of 6 kids that is willing to talk about it. And be really open and honest about our story and what we've gone through and how, it's affected us. And it's deep. Addiction is deep in grief and sorrow and loss. And I just don't want any other family to have to go through it, because I say this, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. I don't know who that would be, but I wouldn't do it. There's no way.
Yeah, you said that
It's
last.
awful.
So with that said, if you're, if you're in a situation right now where, you're experiencing grief from a situation similar to this, you have a child that has taken a path that is very, very difficult. And it's really been hard on your family, and you're just so concerned, and you feel loss over what you thought would have happened. Can you give anybody, that's listening here some advice on, what's gotten you through? Because I know you have battled, you've been a warrior.
It has been a battle for sure. I think what has gotten me through, honestly, is talking about it and being open and honest and admitting that it's rough and admitting that it's hard and sharing vulnerabilities that aren't always the easiest to share, and trying to find my circle. Because I have found the minute I started to share what was really going on in my life, I had these people that just started coming alongside of me or coming alongside my kids. I have a sweet little old lady. She's like 70, and she calls my daughters because her brother was a drug addict growing up. But it's because I talked about it and because I shared about it. And unfortunately, we can't fix addiction for the addict or our kids. They ultimately make those decisions, and that's really hard. But the sooner we accept that, the easier, I don't want to say the easier our life will be, because it's not easy, but it takes some pressure off.
Right. It becomes more manageable.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It's I can't control it, and nothing I can do, because let me tell you, I've done it all. And I've tried it all. There is nothing I have not done, and I can stand here and say that, and the people who have walked with me for 6 years could stand here and say this. I and my husband have done everything possible, and we have spent a lot of money trying to fix this addiction, and it hasn't. He's got to make the decision.
Yeah.
I would say get a good community. It's the only way I've been able to do it. And it's why I started my Instagram page too, because I've had people private message me and say, thank you for sharing. I didn't know that there were other people going through this. And so I just think when you find those people, I always say in a project, many hands make light work.
Mm-hmm.
And I even think in these situations, right? Many hands make life easy
Yeah.
if you're being lifted people.
Yeah. So hopefully you can, maybe you'll text that your Instagram to me so I can link it below for people who want to follow you and get in touch with you. If, just at least, like you said, just
Yeah.
it's so, one thing, and the reason I do this is after I lost my husband, I just felt really alone. And then I started helping people who had the same experience. And I realized that, when you stick together, it feels a lot better. You realize that you're not alone because you aren't
Right.
alone.
And I've even, right. And I mean, real quick too, I mean, I've even had a husband reach out to me and be like, my wife's an addict. I don't know how to handle it. We have kids. And so it's not just parents who have addicts. I talk to husbands and wives too that message me, and it's all the same because we're so helpless.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can't let it out of them. You
Yeah.
can't. I've tried.
Yeah. I know.
I've tried.
I know. You love your kiddos. I know that
Yeah.
for a fact. I've known you a long time and I've watched you with your
Yes, you have. Yes, you
process.
have. You have actually.
Yes. You
Our
love them.
oldest kids are the same age.
I know. Except I'm a little bit older than you. I got started a little bit later.
I got started way earlier. Way earlier. Way earlier.
So, well, I want to thank you. I mean, it takes so much courage to share, and I know you have been so open and um, you know, I know that you're going to help somebody. I hope somebody listening here that it really helps them. And, God has really put you out there, I think, for this, to be a warrior, and you are definitely, walking like Jesus with this, being vulnerable and loving on people
Trying.
and accepting people.
Thank you. Thank you. Trying my best.
You are. So, all right. Well, thank you, Jill. I appreciate you spending time, and everybody, I'll link Jill's information below so that you can get her Instagram and get the support that you need. And I'll link my regular stuff below as well if there's anything I can help you with grief recovery. So with that, thank you all for joining us today.